Single mom's son slipped a letter to the lonely man at the cafe. What he read shattered him in seconds. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Emma Torres had gotten real good at being invisible over the past 4 years. The kind of invisible where customers looked right through you when you refilled their coffee, where you could wipe down tables and clean up messes and exist in a room full of people without a single one of them actually seeing you as anything more than the woman in the apron. That's just what happens when you're a 29-year-old single mom working double shifts at a cafe that smells like burnt coffee and broken dreams, trying to keep your head above water while the world keeps shoving it back under. She was wiping down table 6 for the third time that evening, her lower back screaming from 9 hours on her feet, when she caught herself staring at him again. The man by the window, same spot he claimed every single night for the past 3 months, sitting there like some kind of ghost who'd forgotten he was supposed to move on Marcus. That's what his credit card receipt said, though he never used his voice enough for her to know much else about him beyond his coffee order and the fact that he looked like sadness had physically moved into his body and signed a long-term lease. Her son Jake was tucked into the corner booth doing homework, or at least pretending to do homework, his little legs swinging under the table while he chewed on his pencil and snuck glances at the sad man by the window. Emma had been bringing Jake to work after school ever since his after-school program got too expensive to keep paying for, and the cafe owner Rosa was kind enough to let him camp out as long as he stayed quiet and didn't bother the customers. But tonight Jake wasn't looking at his math worksheet. He was watching Marcus with those big brown eyes that noticed way too much for a 6-year-old Rosa called Emma to the kitchen because the ancient dishwasher was making that god-awful grinding noise again. And Emma told Jake the same thing she always did. Stay put, finish your homework, don't bother anyone. Jake nodded, all innocent smiles and promises he had absolutely no intention of keeping. And the second Emma disappeared through those swinging doors, that kid pulled out his crayons and a piece of lined paper and started writing like his little life depended on it. He wrote slow and careful, tongue poking out the side of his mouth in concentration. And when he was done, he read it over twice to make sure he'd spelled everything right, because his mommy always said, if you're going to say something important, you better say it correct. Then he folded that paper up real neat, slid out of his booth, and walked straight across that cafe floor to the sad man's table, like he'd been planning this mission for weeks, which honestly, he probably had. Marcus looked up when this little kid just appeared next to his table, surprised out of whatever dark thoughts had been keeping him company, and Jake set that folded letter down right next to the coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. This is for you, Jake said, his voice small but determined. Don't tell my mom. And then he took off, running back to his booth before Marcus could even process what just happened, leaving the man sitting there, holding a piece of paper covered in crayon handwriting that said things no stranger should know. Marcus unfolded it slowly, like he was half expecting it to be a joke or a complaint or some kid's random doodle. But what he found instead made his chest do this awful twisting thing it hadn't done in 3 years. The letter said his mommy was lonely too. Said maybe lonely people should be nice to each other. Said his mommy had a pretty smile when she wasn't tired, and it was signed with a crayon heart and the words, from Jake, age 6, P.S. She likes coffee with lots of sugar. For a long moment, Marcus just sat there staring at those words, and something that might have been the ghost of a smile tried real hard to remember how his face was supposed to work. He looked across the cafe at Jake, who waved at him all shy and hopeful, and Marcus did something he hadn't done in longer than he could remember. He waved back. Then he carefully folded that letter, put it in his wallet like it was something precious, stood up and left a $100 bill on the table for a $3 cup of coffee, and walked out into the night before he could talk himself into staying. Emma came back from the kitchen to find Marcus's table empty, which was weird because he usually stayed until closing, and Rosa was holding up a $100 bill looking confused as hell. What did your kid do? Rosa asked, not even mad, just genuinely curious. Emma's stomach dropped. What do you mean, what did he do? Jake was sitting in his booth looking guilty as sin, and when Emma asked him what he gave the sad man, his voice came out so small she almost didn't hear it. A letter. I wrote him a letter that said maybe you guys should be friends because you're both lonely. Emma wanted to die right there on that cafe floor from pure embarrassment, wanted to sink through the tiles and disappear into whatever was underneath. But Rosa was grinning like this was the best thing that had happened all month. Well, whatever that letter said, the man left you this. She handed Emma the bill with a note scrawled on it that just said, "Thank your son for his kindness." And Emma's hand started shaking because she didn't know whether to be mortified or touched or some weird combination of both. The next evening, Emma kept telling herself she wasn't watching the door, wasn't hoping that Marcus would show up, wasn't wondering if her 6-year-old's crayon letter had scared off the one customer who seemed more broken than she was. But when that door chimed at exactly 6 o'clock and Marcus walked in, her heart did this stupid jumping thing she had no business feeling. He didn't go to his usual table, though. He walked straight toward her, and when he held out his hand and introduced himself properly for the first time in 3 months, his voice was rough, like he'd forgotten how to use it for actual conversation. "I never thanked your son properly," Marcus said, and Emma noticed his eyes weren't quite as empty as they usually were. "And I never introduced myself. I'm Marcus." Emma's voice came out way shakier than she wanted. "Emma, but you probably knew that from the letter my son had absolutely no business writing." Marcus smiled then, really smiled, and it changed his whole face. He wasn't wrong, though, about the smile. Emma felt her cheeks go hot. "I'm so sorry, he shouldn't have—" But Marcus cut her off, gentle. "Can I buy you a coffee after your shift?" Emma opened her mouth to say no, because this was crazy. He was a customer. She didn't know him. This wasn't how life worked for people like her. But then Jake's voice rang out across the cafe loud enough for everyone to hear. "Say yes, Mommy!" The whole place cracked up laughing, and Emma wanted to murder her kid and hug him at the same time. "I guess one coffee wouldn't hurt," she heard herself say, and Marcus's smile got a little wider. "Good, I'll wait." He went to his table, but this time he wasn't staring at nothing. He was watching her, and Emma realized her son's ridiculous letter might have just changed absolutely everything. The last hour of Emma's shift was an absolute disaster, the kind where she couldn't do a single thing right because her brain had completely checked out and moved into some alternate universe where a strange man was waiting to have coffee with her, and her entire body had apparently forgotten how to function like a normal human being. She spilled coffee on table 3, mixed up orders for table 7, and nearly dropped an entire tray of dishes because her hands wouldn't stop shaking. And Rosa was watching the whole thing with this knowing smirk that made Emma want to throw a dish rag at her face. "You got it bad already, and you haven't even had the date yet," Rosa said, wiping down the counter and not even trying to hide her amusement. Emma grabbed a clean pot and started making fresh coffee just to have something to do with her hands. "It's not a date, it's just coffee, after work, with a customer who my son ambushed with a crayon letter about how pathetically lonely I am." Rosa laughed so hard she snorted. "Girl, when's the last time you had just coffee with a man who looks at you like that?" Emma didn't answer because the truth was 4 years. Not since Jake's dad walked out the door and never looked back. And she really didn't want to think about that right now. When 9 o'clock finally hit and Emma's shift officially ended, Rosa practically shoved her out of her apron and took Jake upstairs to her apartment with a wink that was absolutely not subtle. Jake whispered to Marcus on his way out, his little voice trying to be serious. "Don't make her sad, okay?" And Marcus answered him like he was making an actual vow. "I wouldn't dream of it, buddy." Then it was just the two of them sitting across from each other at his usual table. And the silence that fell between them was so awkward Emma wanted to crawl under the booth and hide there forever. She tried to break it with humor because that's what she did when she was nervous. "So do you come here every night because our coffee's amazing, or because you've got nowhere else to be?" The second it left her mouth, she wanted to take it back. But Marcus just smiled this sad little smile and said, "Honest answer, it's the second one." The way he said it, so simple and raw, like he'd given up on pretending everything was fine, made Emma's chest hurt. "I used to be a pediatric surgeon," Marcus continued, staring at his coffee like it held answers to questions he'd stopped asking. "Worked at Children's Hospital for 15 years, saved a lot of kids, got real good at fixing things that were broken." Emma heard the past tense and knew something bad was coming. What made you stop? Marcus's jaw tightened, and for a second she thought he wasn't going to answer. But then he said it flat and emotionless, like he'd practiced saying it so many times the words didn't cut anymore. My daughter died 3 years ago, leukemia. She was 5 years old, and I'm a doctor who spent his entire career saving other people's kids, and I couldn't do a damn thing to save my own. Emma's hand moved across the table before her brain could stop it, covering his, and he looked at their hands like he'd forgotten what human touch felt like. My wife left 6 months after we buried Lily, Marcus said, his voice getting quieter. Said looking at me reminded her too much of what we lost, and I get it. I really do, because I can't look in the mirror most days without seeing the same thing. He finally looked up at Emma, and his eyes were wet. Your son asked in his letter if I was lonely, and yeah, I've been lonely for 3 years straight, the kind of lonely that sits in your chest and makes it hard to remember why you're supposed to keep breathing. Emma felt tears sliding down her face. I've been lonely for 4 years, ever since Jake's dad found out I was pregnant and decided being a father wasn't part of his life plan. They talked for 2 hours after that, the cafe empty around them, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. And Emma told him things she hadn't said out loud in years. How she'd been working 2 jobs since Jake was born, the cafe during the week and cleaning offices on weekends. How her dream of being a teacher died when she couldn't afford to finish her degree. How some nights she cried in the bathroom after Jake fell asleep because she was so tired of barely keeping her head above water. Marcus listened to every word like it mattered, like she mattered. And then he told her about selling his medical practice and his big house because they reminded him of the family he used to have. About living in a small apartment where the walls didn't echo with memories. About coming to this cafe every night because the noise of other people living their lives made him feel less like a ghost. Until your son's letter, I hadn't spoken more than 10 words a day and month, Marcus admitted. I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually talk to someone instead of just existing in the same space as them. Emma wiped her eyes with a napkin that was probably supposed to be for coffee spills, not emotional breakdowns. Jake's got this thing where he sees people hurting and just wants to fix it. Like he thinks if he's nice enough to everyone, maybe the universe will be nice back. Marcus smiled for real then. Smart kid. He's not wrong. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became part of their routine in this way that felt natural and terrifying. At the same time, he showed up every evening, but instead of sitting alone staring at nothing, he talked to Emma between her tables and make Jake laugh with terrible dad jokes about dinosaurs in space. When Jake showed him his drawings, Marcus gave actual detailed feedback like, this T-Rex's proportions are scientifically accurate. Good job. And Jake would beam so bright, Emma's heart hurt watching it. One day, Marcus brought Jake a book about the solar system, and when Emma protested that he didn't need to do that, Marcus just shrugged and said, I know, I wanted to. When Emma's car broke down and she mentioned it while refilling his coffee, Marcus showed up the next day with keys to a car he said was just sitting in his garage collecting dust. I can't accept that, Emma said immediately, because she'd learned the hard way that accepting help from people usually came with strings attached. It's not a gift, it's a loan, between friends, and Marcus said, and something about the word friends made Emma pause. Is that what we are? She asked. Marcus smiled. Yeah, I think we are. The moment that really got her was Jake's school art show. Jake had asked Marcus if he could come because Emma had to work, and before Emma could say that Marcus was probably busy, he'd already asked what time. Emma watched from across the school cafeteria as Marcus stood in front of Jake's drawing, this crayon picture of 3 people labeled Me, Mommy, and Marcus, and saw his eyes get wet. The teacher assumed Marcus was Jake's dad, and he didn't correct her, just kept staring at that drawing like it was the most important piece of art he'd ever seen. That night after Jake fell asleep, Emma did what she'd been avoiding for weeks and Googled Marcus's full name. The search results hit her like a freight train. Dr. Marcus Reed, renowned pediatric oncologist, articles about his groundbreaking work, photos of him receiving awards, a whole Wikipedia page about his contributions to children's cancer research. Then the darker articles, the ones about his daughter's death, about him donating $5 million to charity in her name, about him closing his practice and disappearing from public life. There was a photo of him from 4 years ago, smiling and vibrant and looking nothing like the hollow man who walked into the cafe every night. Rosa found Emma sitting in the back office with her head in her hands. "You found out who he is." It wasn't a question. Emma looked up, her eyes red. "He's not just some lonely guy, Rosa. He was somebody important, somebody who saved lives and donated millions and got written about in magazines. And I'm a waitress who barely graduated high school." Rosa sat down next to her. "And now he's somebody who makes your kids smile and looks at you like you hung the moon. So what exactly is the problem?" Emma's voice cracked. "The problem is, this doesn't make sense. People like him don't end up with people like me. And I can't let Jake get attached to someone who's going to wake up one day and realize we're not worth the trouble." The next evening when Marcus walked in, Emma couldn't look at him the same way, and he noticed immediately because, of course he did. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked when she barely said 2 words to him. Emma forced herself to meet his eyes. "I looked you up. I know who you are, what you were, and I think maybe we should keep this professional." Marcus went completely still. "You think finding out about my past changes things?" Emma's hands were shaking. "You're Dr. Marcus Reed. You were on magazine covers. You saved children's lives. You donated more money than I'll make in my lifetime. And I serve coffee and can barely pay rent. So yeah, it changes things." Marcus stood up and walked toward her, and Emma's breath caught because she thought he was leaving. Thought this was the part where he agreed with her and walked out of their lives forever. "You're right," he said quietly. "It doesn't make sense." Emma felt her heart sink, but then Marcus kept going. "It doesn't make sense that your 6-year-old son was the first person in 3 years to make me want to get out of bed in the morning. Doesn't make sense that talking to you for an hour makes me feel more alive than surgery ever did. And it sure as hell doesn't make sense that I'm falling in love with you when I swore I'd never let anyone matter to me again." Emma couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stand there while Marcus's words hit her like waves. "So if you want to push me away because you think you're not good enough, that's your choice," Marcus said, his voice rough. "But don't use my past as the excuse, because the man I was doesn't exist anymore. And the man I'm trying to become only exists because of you and Jake." He turned toward the door and Emma's voice came out broken. "Marcus, wait!" Marcus had his hand on the door handle, shoulders tight like he was bracing himself to walk back out into the cold alone, when Jake's voice cut through the cafe like a lightning bolt. "Mommy, don't let him leave!" Emma spun around to see her son standing on the booth seat, his little face scrunched up and desperate in that way only 6-year-olds can pull off when they're watching their whole world about to fall apart. "He makes you smile for real, not the fake smile you do at work. Don't let him go." Emma looked at her son, then at Marcus, who'd stopped but hadn't turned around yet, and something in her chest just cracked wide open because her kid was braver than she'd ever been, and he was absolutely right. She crossed the cafe floor, her heart slamming so hard against her ribs she thought everyone could probably hear it. And when she reached Marcus, she put her hand on his arm. "I'm terrified," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus turned around. "Of what?" Emma laughed, but it came out shaky. "Of this. Of you. Of the fact that my 6-year-old has more guts than I do." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I haven't let anyone close in 4 years, and you're asking me to let in someone who's been through hell and back and probably deserves way better than a broke single mom who can't even afford to fix her own car." Marcus reached up and gently caught her hand. "I'm not asking you to fix me, Emma. I'm asking you to let me try to be whole again, and I want to do that with you." The cafe had gone completely silent, the few remaining customers absolutely riveting their attention on this scene playing out. But Emma didn't care anymore. She pulled Marcus down and kissed him, and it was tentative and scared but so real it made her dizzy. Jake's cheer from across the cafe could probably be heard 3 blocks away, and Rosa was behind the counter literally crying into a dish rag. And when Emma and Marcus broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "So we're doing this?" he asked. Emma nodded, still trying to catch her breath. "Yeah, I think we are." 3 months later, Emma was standing in her tiny apartment, staring at the letter from her landlord that said her rent was going up $400 a month, which might as well have been $4,000 for all the chance she had of affording it. Marcus was there for dinner because Jake had insisted, and he noticed everything. The leaky sink Emma couldn't afford to fix, the crack in the ceiling she'd stopped seeing, the space heater running because the actual heat hadn't worked in 2 years. When Emma's phone rang and she stepped into her bedroom to take the call, Marcus heard every word through the paper-thin walls. "I can't afford that increase. I know what market rate is, but I need more time, please." She came back out smiling like nothing was wrong, but her eyes were red. And after Jake went to bed, Marcus found her on the balcony that was barely big enough for 2 people. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. Emma tried to brush it off. "I can handle it." Marcus turned her to face him. "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to do it alone. Move in with me." Emma nearly dropped her coffee. "Marcus, that's insane. We've been together 3 months." He shook his head. "It's practical. I have a 3-bedroom place I barely use. You and Jake could have your own space. No rent, just company." Emma's walls went right back up. "I won't be your charity case." Marcus looked frustrated for the first time since she'd known him. "Why is accepting help so hard for you?" Emma's voice cracked. "Because people leave. They help until it gets inconvenient, and then they're gone. That's what people do." She was crying now. Couldn't stop it. Jake's dad promised to help. Then he was gone before Jake was even born. My parents promised to support me. Then they cut me off for keeping him. So forgive me if I don't trust promises anymore. Marcus pulled her close and she fought it for about 2 seconds before just collapsing against his chest. "I'm not them," he said into her hair. "I lost everything that mattered and spent 3 years walking around like the living dead. Then your son handed me a crayon letter and gave me a reason to feel something again." His voice broke. "You're not too much, Emma. You're exactly enough." 2 days later, Jake got sent home from school with a high fever, and Emma was at work when the school called, absolutely panicking because she couldn't leave without losing her job, and Jake was sick, and she had no idea what to do. She called Marcus with shaking hands. "I don't know what to do. I can't leave work, and Jake needs—" Marcus cut her off. "I'm already in the car. Which school?" 20 minutes later, he was signing Jake out, and the school nurse handed him forms saying he was listed as emergency contact. Marcus stared at the paperwork. "I am." The nurse showed him where Emma had added his name last week, and something in Marcus's chest absolutely shattered in the best possible way. He took Jake back to his place and checked him over with the careful precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Just a flu bug, buddy. You'll be okay." Jake, feverish and small, looked up at him with worried eyes. "Are you gonna leave like my real dad did?" Marcus sat down on the couch and pulled Jake against his side. "No, Jake, I'm not going anywhere, I promise." When Emma rushed over after her shift and found her son asleep on Marcus's couch with Marcus reading beside him, she just broke down crying, 4 years of doing everything alone finally catching up with her. Marcus sat beside her on the floor while she sobbed into her hands. "You came. You actually came when I called." He pulled her close. "Of course I came. Where else would I be?" Emma pulled a folded paper from her purse, her hands shaking. "Jake's not the only one who can write letters." Marcus read it while Emma watched his face, and her voice narrated what she'd written. "My son is braver than I'll ever be. He saw 2 lonely people and decided to fix it. He understood something I'd forgotten, that we're not meant to do this alone. If the offer still stands, we'd like to come home to you." Marcus was crying by the time he finished. "The offer stands, it'll always stand." They kissed like it was a promise neither of them planned on breaking. 6 months later, they walked into Riverside Café as a family, and Rosa practically screamed when she saw them. They sat at what used to be Marcus's lonely table, and Jake pulled out his crayons and started writing. "What are you drawing, baby?" Emma asked Jake, pointed to an elderly man sitting alone in the corner. "Another letter. He looks lonely." He walked over and handed it to the man, and when the stranger read it and started crying, Jake brought him back to their table. "This is George. He's a widower too. Can he have dinner with us?" Marcus looked at Emma and they both smiled, because their son was absolutely going to save the whole world one letter at a time. And honestly, they wouldn't want it any other way. Sometimes the family you need finds you through a 6-year-old's crayon letter, through coffee at the end of a long shift, through the courage to let someone in when you've forgotten how. If this story reminded you that second chances are real and loneliness doesn't have to be forever, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story that reminds you what it means to be human. Thanks for being here with us.